From the powerful shores of India to the deserts of Ethiopia, the vast Persian Empire thundered beneath the command of one ruler, King Ahasuerus. His reign spanned 127 provinces, each bowing under the weight of his authority. In the heart of Susa, his palace stood not just as a residence, but as a monument of opulence and authority. Yet within these lavish halls, darkness was stirring. A silent conspiracy brewed, a deadly edict formed to extinguish an entire people. But before any evil could take root, God had already orchestrated a divine counterplan. Esther, an orphan with a hidden identity, found herself walking halls lined with gold, caught between her fear and her destiny. Meanwhile, a decree was sealed, carrying the weight of death for her people. Yet the Lord, who sees all from the beginning to the end, had placed his chosen one at the center of the storm, a vessel prepared to turn fear into deliverance. Esther 4 verse 14. Outside the palace walls, cries filled the streets. Mordecai, Esther's cousin and faithful guardian, tore his garments in anguish, mourning the decree that had marked the Jews for destruction. In the court, Haman, driven by ancient hatred and an insatiable thirst for power, manipulated the king with a false narrative. Esther stood at the threshold of decision. To speak was to risk death, to remain silent meant the demise of her people. The scripture reminds us in Proverbs 31 verse 8, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." She gathered courage and devised a plan that would place her at the very heart of power, a royal dinner with the king and Haman where destinies would collide. In that moment of divine tension, Haman's confident smile would transform into horror as God revealed his justice. Esther's tale is more than a historical drama. It is a living testament of divine positioning. A woman orphaned and hidden, chosen for a moment of salvation. A nation teetering between ruin and rescue. The invisible hand of God moving through earthly palaces to fulfill his promises. This is not just Esther's legacy, it is a reflection of how God still works today, calling ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Just as the psalmist declares, "He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap," Psalm 113 verse 7, so he lifted Esther to the throne for the salvation of his people. In the third year of Ahasuerus' rule, he decided to display the extent of his power to the world. His ambition knew no limits. A royal banquet was held, lasting 180 days, showcasing the immense riches and luxuries of the Persian Empire. At its conclusion, a celebration was opened to the public. Music danced in the air, golden vessels gleamed under candlelight, and the palace overflowed with wine and revelry. But intoxicated by pride and drink, the king made a fatal demand. He ordered Queen Vashti to appear before the crowd and display her beauty. She refused. In that defiance, the king's pride was shattered. Silence fell like a shroud over the festivities. Ahasuerus' advisors saw a crisis of authority. If Vashti could reject the king publicly, what message would that send across the empire? A harsh decree followed. She would never again appear before him, and her royal position would be given to someone deemed more worthy. Thus the throne was left vacant. Although the king held power over empires, he now lacked a queen. In his longing, a new plan emerged. Gather the most beautiful maidens from every corner of the kingdom, and let the king choose his new queen from among them. What seemed like a political strategy was in fact a divine setup. In the city of Susa, a humble young woman lived quietly. Her name was Hadassah, though she would soon be known as Esther. Orphaned and raised by her cousin Mordecai, she had grown up with deep reverence for God. When the king's officers arrived in Susa to gather maidens, Esther was chosen. Before she left, Mordecai gave her one crucial instruction: keep your heritage a secret. And so she entered the palace with a new name and a hidden identity. Esther 2 verse 10 notes, Esther had not revealed her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to. Her destiny was unfolding, and yet, neither she nor those around her could foresee the magnitude of her role. Once inside, the young women underwent 12 months of preparation, receiving lavish treatments and expensive perfumes. But Esther stood out. Her humility, grace, and inner strength captured the favor of Haggai, the eunuch in charge, who gave her the finest care and garments. Unlike the others, when it was her time to appear before the king, she asked for nothing additional. She presented herself simply, authentically. The king was captivated. In that moment, the crown of Persia was placed on her head. The orphan had become queen. God had lifted her up in silence and secrecy to stand in a place of influence. A great banquet followed in her honor, a celebration across the empire. But beyond the feasting and joy, shadows began to loom once more. Mordecai, now serving at the palace gate, overheard a plot. Two of the king's officers were conspiring in secret. They intended to assassinate Ahasuerus. Acting quickly, Mordecai passed the warning to Esther, who related to the king. The traitors were caught and executed. Though Mordecai's loyalty was recorded in the royal chronicles, it was soon forgotten. But God never forgets. That simple act of righteousness was sown as a seed, soon to bear fruit in the salvation of a nation. Time passed and a new figure rose in the royal court. Haman, the Agagite, an ancient enemy of Israel, was elevated above all other princes. With power came arrogance. Haman demanded that all bow before him. Everyone obeyed except Mordecai. When questioned, he gave a simple answer: "I am a Jew." He stood firm, refusing to bow to man. This act of defiance enraged Haman. But his hatred extended beyond one man. He wanted to annihilate the entire Jewish people. Haman approached the king with a web of deception. "There is a certain people scattered through your empire," he claimed. "They follow different laws and do not obey yours. It is dangerous to let them remain." He offered a fortune in silver to fund their destruction. Without inquiry, the king gave Haman his signet ring, sealing the decree. Letters were dispatched with haste to every province. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, all Jews, young and old, men and women, were to be destroyed. The enemy had made his move. But God was already steps ahead. In the heart of Susa, as the decree echoed across the land, fear spread like wildfire among the Jewish people. Mourning covered the streets, ashes on heads, garments torn, and loud cries rising to the heavens. But among the grief, one man stood not only in sorrow but in purpose: Mordecai. Wrapped in sackcloth, he stood at the palace gate, refusing to be silent. Inside the royal walls, Esther was unaware of the storm brewing outside. But when word reached her about Mordecai's mourning, she sent messengers, confused and distressed. Why was her cousin in such despair? Mordecai's answer came not with comfort but with urgency. He revealed the decree, the annihilation planned by Haman, and then came the call that would shake Esther to her core: "Do not think you will escape in the king's house. Who knows if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" These words pierced Esther's heart. She was no longer just a queen, she was now the last hope of a people. Esther's hands trembled. Her voice faltered. 4 days she walked the corridors of the palace, haunted by one truth: to enter the king's presence uninvited was to risk death. The law was unbreakable. No one could approach the king unless summoned, not even the queen. And yet, in the depth of her soul, something stirred. A divine urgency. So she made a decision not of royalty but of courage. "Go, gather all the Jews in Susa," she told Mordecai. "Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. I will do the same. And then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." It was no longer about safety, it was about obedience. It was no longer about the crown, it was about the call. Esther prepared herself not with jewels but with prayer, not with perfume but with purpose. The fate of a nation rested on a moment. And when the 3rd day came, she rose, clothed in royal garments, but armed with a heavenly assignment. The royal hall stretched before her like a valley of decision. Guards at the door. The king on his throne. The weight of silence pressing against the air. Esther stepped forward. Every heartbeat sounded like thunder in her ears. Would he extend the golden scepter? Or would death greet her with cold finality? The room watched, breathless. Then grace. The king saw her. His eyes softened. He extended the scepter toward her. Esther touched its tip and life was given. "What is your request, Queen Esther?" "Even up to half the kingdom it will be given to you." But Esther did not rush. She did not speak yet of the death sentence over her people. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. A pause in the story. A divine delay. God was not finished writing this plot. That night, even the king could not sleep. He ordered the royal chronicles to be read, and there, hidden in forgotten records, was the account of Mordecai saving his life. At that moment, destiny turned. The next morning, Haman entered the court, eager to request Mordecai's execution. But before he could speak, the king asked him a question: "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman, consumed with pride, assumed the honor was for him. He described a grand parade, royal robes, and public praise. "Excellent," the king said. "Go at once, do all of this for Mordecai the Jew." Haman's face fell. The humiliation was divine. God was not only protecting his servant, he was exalting him in the face of his enemy. That same day the second banquet began. Esther sat at the table with the king and the very man who had plotted her people's destruction. The moment had come. Esther revealed her identity. "I am a Jew," she said, her voice steady, "and my people have been sold to be destroyed." The king rose in anger. Haman's plan was exposed. Judgment came swiftly. The gallows he built for Mordecai would now be his own end. Justice from the hand of heaven. Have you already clicked on the like button and subscribed to the channel? This helps us understand that you are enjoying our videos and YouTube is sending you more. We count on your help. Let's go back to the video. But the decree still stood. In Persian law, what was sealed by the king's ring could not be revoked. The clock was ticking. The day of annihilation was approaching. So once again, Esther stood before the king. This time not for her life but for the lives of thousands. She pleaded for a new decree. And once again the king listened. A second edict was written, this time empowering the Jews to defend themselves. Word spread quickly. Hope returned. And when the 13th of Adar arrived, the Jewish people stood together. They fought not for revenge but for survival. And God gave them victory. Not only were they spared but they triumphed. Mordecai was exalted to the highest rank, second only to the king. Esther's voice became a symbol of deliverance. And the day that was meant for destruction became a day of celebration. Purim, a feast that echoes through the generations. A reminder that when God writes the script, no enemy can erase it. This is not just a story of the past. It's a revelation for the present. Like Esther, many today walk through palaces of influence without realizing they were placed there on purpose. The enemy may whisper lies, build gallows, write decrees, but God is always one step ahead. He raises up deliverers in the quiet places. He turns forgotten deeds into divine setups. And when the time comes, he gives boldness to speak and courage to act. Esther's story is proof that faith can stand in the face of fear, that one voice can shift the fate of nations, and that God never forgets his people. You may be in a moment of silence. You may be behind palace walls. But perhaps you too were born for such a time as this. The book of Esther is not only history, it is prophecy. A call to rise, to risk, and to believe that when God places you in position, the victory is already written. Slaughtered and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have remained silent, for such a distress would not be worth disturbing the king. But this is a matter of life and death. The king's eyes widened, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock. Who is he demanded. Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Esther's gaze was steady. Her voice, though calm, struck with the force of thunder. An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman. Silence fell over the banquet like a thick fog. The blood drained from Haman's face. He stumbled backward, realizing the trap had closed around him. The king, filled with fury, rose from the table and walked into the palace garden, his mind in turmoil. How had he been deceived? How had he allowed the hand of a traitor to sign the death of innocent people? But inside the hall, Haman remained, falling at Esther's feet, begging for his life. He knew mercy could only come from the one he had sought to destroy. As the king returned, he saw Haman collapsed on the couch where Esther reclined. His rage boiled over. Will he even assault the queen while she is with me in the house? At those words, the guards seized Haman. One of them, Harbona, stepped forward and spoke. A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it prepared for Mordecai, the man who saved the king's life. The irony burned through the room. The very instrument of death Haman had built would now serve as the justice of the throne. Hang him on it, the king ordered. And with that command, Haman's fate was sealed. The man who once stood at the pinnacle of power now hung in disgrace, judged not by the king alone, but by the hand of the Almighty. Peace returned to the king's spirit. But more than that, deliverance had been birthed. A decree had been reversed. A people had been saved, and Esther had fulfilled the purpose for which she was born. The next morning, Mordecai was summoned and brought before the king. The royal signet ring, once worn by Haman, was placed on Mordecai's finger. He was robed in garments of honor and declared second in command over all of Persia. Esther, still with fire in her soul, pleaded for the lives of her people. The king issued a new decree, one that could not erase the old law but empowered the Jews to defend themselves. Across the provinces, joy erupted like fire through dry grass. What had once been a sentence of death became a divine invitation to victory. The 13th day of the 12th month arrived, the day when enemies had planned to strike, but instead, it became a day of triumph. The fear of the Jews fell upon the land, and those who had once plotted against them were now overtaken. The people rejoiced with feasting and gladness, with songs and laughter, celebrating a God who had not forgotten them. What began with silence and mourning ended in honor and glory. And so, from the ashes of despair, rose the Feast of Purim, a celebration for generations to come. A reminder that even when God is not named, his fingerprints are on every page. Esther's courage, Mordecai's faith, and the unseen hand of the Almighty turned what was meant for evil into salvation. For who would have thought that a Jewish orphan would become queen? Who would have imagined that a simple act of fasting and prayer could shift the course of empires? But that is how God works, in the silence, in the shadows, in the impossible. The story of Esther is not just history. It is prophecy. It is a call to every soul who stands at the crossroads of fear and destiny. For such a time as this, you too may be called to rise, to speak, to act. And if you do, if you walk forward in faith even when trembling, you will see that the God who delivered a nation still delivers today. In a moment that changed the fate of a nation, Queen Esther stood before the king, not as a subject but as a voice for a silenced people. Her words did not tremble, they thundered with a divine urgency, "Grant me my life and spare my people. We have been sold to be destroyed, to be annihilated." The palace held its breath. The king's expression shifted from confusion to fury, the silence around him pierced by the cry of truth. "Who would dare do such a thing?" he demanded, voice echoing off the marble. Esther's gaze locked onto Haman. Slowly, with unshaken resolve, she declared, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." The name rang through the hall like a death sentence. Haman's face drained of color. For the first time, the manipulator saw the trap he had set now closing in on him. The tension snapped like a bowstring. The king stormed into the garden, unable to contain his rage, while Haman, once proud and untouchable, fell to his knees, groveling at Esther's feet. "Please," he begged, "do not let them kill me." But it was too late. The king returned and witnessed Haman, hands on the queen in desperation. "Will you now assault my queen even in my own house?" he roared. The verdict was instant. Guards moved in, and as they covered Haman's face, a sign of irreversible judgment in Persia, the king gave his chilling order, "Hang him on the gallows he prepared for Mordecai." Haman, who had plotted genocide, was now sentenced to die by his own wicked design. The justice of heaven had spoken through the lips of a mortal king. Have you already clicked on the like button and subscribed to the channel? This helps us understand that you are enjoying our videos and YouTube is sending you more. We count on your help. Let's go back to the video. But the danger had not fully passed. Though Haman was dead, the decree he had set into motion could not be revoked. By Persian law, a royal edict was permanent. The countdown to the massacre continued. Once again, Esther risked her life. She approached the throne uninvited, her eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking with sacred desperation. "If I have found favor in your sight, let the decree be reversed. Spare my people." The king, moved, did what only he could do. He issued a new command. From this day forward, the Jews may rise and defend themselves. Any who attack them will be met with force. The message spread like wildfire across the empire. From India to Ethiopia, the drums of battle began to sound, not for conquest but for survival. When the dreaded day arrived, the tables turned. Those who rose against the Jews found themselves face to face with a people strengthened by divine justice and prepared to fight. In Susa, the capital, the battle raged for 2 days. Across the empire, 75,000 enemies fell. The sons of Haman, symbols of generational hatred, were hanged just like their father. Yet the Jews did not take spoils or plunder. Their fight was not for gain but for life. And as the dust settled, what remained was not a trail of vengeance, but a testimony of God's providence. Mourning turned into celebration, fear into triumph. Esther and Mordecai decreed that this day be remembered forever, a festival to honor the God who delivers. Thus was born Purim, a day of joy and remembrance. Each year, in the month of Adar, the Jewish people remember the time death was reversed. They read the story of Esther not just as history but as prophecy. Because even when God's name was never mentioned, his fingerprints were all over the story. Behind the coincidences, the sleepless nights, the reversed fates, there was a plan, guided by an invisible but unstoppable hand. Esther didn't just save her people. She awakened a truth that echoes through every generation. When we stand in our God-given position, even in silence, heaven speaks through us. Thank you for walking through this story with us. What you've just experienced is not just a tale from ancient Persia. It's a mirror of our lives today. Sometimes we feel unseen, unheard, even forgotten. But the story of Esther teaches us this. When all seems lost, when evil seems to win, God is still working. Every scene in this film was crafted with care, every line spoken with purpose, because these stories are alive. If this message stirred something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Like, comment, subscribe. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, reaching hearts that need to hear them. And this is just the beginning. Up next, we'll bring you the powerful journey of Nehemiah, one man who rebuilt the ruins of Jerusalem under threat, conspiracy, and impossible odds. A story of perseverance, vision, and divine protection. And before you go, we've prepared 2 more journeys just for you. One is the gripping story of Daniel, his courage in Babylon, his visions of the end times, his stand in the lion's den. The other, a cinematic dive into the apocalyptic prophecies that still shape our world. Choose one, and keep uncovering with us the mysteries of God's Word. May the Lord bless you.